Welcome to today's episode of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Today I'll be joined by Shukes and Giff, the podcast co-host, Shake-Up Learning trainer, and Google Innovator Jen Giffen to talk about sketchnoting and her favorite tools for sketchnoting. We'll also talk about a contest where you could win a free book for a friend. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Dennis Sheeran.
And I'm Raymond Steinmetz from the Instant Relevance Podcast. And we're part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Welcome. What's up, duct tapers? For the returning listeners, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here once again. For our new friends, welcome in. I'm so honored to have you with us. As most of you already know, my name is Jake, and I'm here to talk to you about duct tape and educational technology, and how in my silly mind, the two of them go together to form a silly metaphor and, more importantly, an EdTech integration mindset that I think that you could use in your learning environments now. To my faithful duct tapers out there, I apologize for the wonkiness of my podcast schedule over the last 5 months or so. It took me 3 whole months to get the season finale to you, and then it took me a month and a half more to get to you to a first regular format episode like today's to truly launch the season. It's been a crazy few months as we've navigated the transition from a hybrid-ish school year into a normal-ish school year, along with the launch of my book and the rapidly expanding itineraries of my 3 kids: baseball, soccer, theater, orchestra, flag football. Oh my. Anyhow, I'm finally here for you with this episode, and here's hoping that this is a good thing that was worth waiting for. For those of you who are educational duct tape newbies, I'd like to share a little bit with you about how an episode goes. So I always start the show with an introduction, kind of like this one, followed by one of my soapbox moments, which are kind of my chance to do something like a mini TED Talk, minus the stage and the audience and the fanfare and the cameras and the fancy lights and the red carpet. So otherwise, it's like a mini TED Talk. After that, I'll welcome in my guest to do the educational duct tape thing. First, after a brief chat, the guest and I play a game so that we can get to know them and laugh together. Then I'll ask the guest an educational duct tape question. This is a question that a teacher might have in their own practice. My guest and I will take turns discussing educational technology tools or strategies that we could use to answer that question. And so we'll talk about that. And then after we tie a bow on that question and I bid my guest adieu, comes the celebration of the adjacent possible. That's the time when we hear from the duct tapers, and that's you. In this segment, I share some of my favorite tweets about the show, so get out there and share a clever one about today's episode. I might share a recording from the Educational Duct Tape Flipgrid grid or SpeakPipe page, so click one of those links in the show notes and submit a recording. And finally, an Apple Podcast review for the show, so head over there and give the show a witty review. And another thing that I often do in that segment is answer a question that somebody might have. It might be a question about something, an educational technology tool, and I'll do my best to share an answer for it. And that all happens in what we call the celebration of the adjacent possible. And then after all that, I'll bid you farewell for a fortnight or so, about 2 weeks, until the next episode comes out. Okay, so that gets the newbies up to speed. Did you know that 3-time educational duct tape guest, Shukes and Giff, the podcast co-host, Shake-Up Learning trainer, and Google Innovator Jen Giffen created a set of sketch notes based on the chapters of my book, Educational Duct Tape and EdTech Integration Mindset? If you haven't seen Sketchnote Jake yet, you're missing out. But you won't only enjoy my plaid shirt and stick figure arms, you'll also enjoy the way she shares key lessons, quotes, and takeaways in these fun formats. Head over to jakemiller.net and search for Sketchnote to see them for yourself. And this is perfect timing to talk about it because Jen is the guest today, and we will talk not only about those sketch notes, but about how she makes her sketch notes, because it's such a cool skill to have. And I know lots of you would love to learn how to make sketch notes and what different apps and tools and strategies to use to do that. But before we get to that, speaking of the book, I've got a contest running right now where you can win a copy for a friend or a colleague. By the way, why do I always say a friend or a colleague? Is this like some people are your friends and some people are colleagues that you don't like? And if they're colleagues that you don't like, why are you giving them a free copy of my book? Like, give it to somebody you do like. A friend or a colleague. It's a weird thing that I do. Anyhow, if you would like to win a free copy of Educational Duct Tape and EdTech Integration Mindset for a friend or colleague, here's what you've got to do. First, to be eligible, you have to have purchased and read the book. Second, click the link in the show notes to the podcast's Flipgrid or SpeakPipe, and then record an endorsement for the book, assuming that is that you liked it. Please don't lie, but also please don't record a message about how much you hated it. I'm fragile, guys. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. And anyhow, record that positive endorsement, and you'll get to hear yourself in an upcoming episode. And if you're lucky, your friend, might be a winner. All you've got to do is tell us who you are, where you're at, what you teach, and what you liked about the book. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. It doesn't have to be anything long, just a sentence or two about what you enjoyed about the book, along with who you are, where you live, where you're at, and what you teach. And then again, that sentence or two about what you liked. The contest ends at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on October 31st, 2021. The spookiest deadline for a contest ever, the night of Halloween. So grab your copy of the book, head to the Flipgrid or SpeakPipe in the show notes, and record that endorsement. Next up, it's calendar time. No, not like in first grade where you sing the days of the week song to the tune of the Addams Family theme. It's the time where I tell you what's coming up on my actual calendar. And at this point, there's only one thing on my calendar, but it's a really, really good one. It's the free online Shake Up Learning Back to School Conference. It's completely free, it's online, it's asynchronous, and it's designed for K-12 teachers and educational leaders. It launches on September 24th. I've got to be honest, I'm not sure when I'm putting this episode out, so it may have already launched by the time you're hearing this. And the videos go live the 24th of September through the 30th of September, and then they're available all the way through the 30th of October. So you've got all the way until October 30th to watch the videos. They feature more than 40 breakout sessions from education experts, including, experts and then me. But among the experts are Evan Robb, Dr. Angela Draper, John Carippo, Tony Vincent, Pam Hubler, Sarah Kiefer, Kim Mattina, and more, plus special keynotes by Casey Bell and today's podcast guest, Jen Giffen. By the way, did you notice all of those past Educational Duct Tape guests in that list? Yeah, it's a loaded conference. Lots of awesomeness in there. You could sign up at shakeuplearning.com/conference. I'll put that link in the show notes, but that starts on September 24th. The videos launch up until September 30th, and then they're available until October 30th for free. Since that's all that's currently on my schedule, I should point out that if you've got an event coming up, I would love to be a part of it, whether it's on a stage or on a screen. My favorite thing to do is speak to and work with educators. Honestly, I love supporting educators in developing their EdTech integration mindset and learning about the different tools they could potentially use in that setting. So if you're planning an event, please head over to jakemiller.net/speaking to see some speaking videos and to send me a message. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. That's perfect. Climb up on there. It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor falls, the major lifts. I bet most of you recognize that set of 14 words. I bet many of you even started humming or singing along. For those of you who recognize it but are unsure what song it was, the next line will probably seal it for you. It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor falls, the major lifts, the baffled king composing hallelujah. That's right. Hallelujah is the song, and it's what I want to talk to you about today. You might know it as a song by Jeff Buckley, but it's not actually by Buckley. It's by Leonard Cohen. And that line, the baffled king composing hallelujah, I'd like to talk about that line and how it relates to teaching, at least in my classroom. You've probably heard this song in a dozen different places. The movie Shrek, that was the first place I heard it. The movie Sing, the stages of American Idol or The Voice, open mic nights in your neighborhood, pretty much everywhere. Just about every singer has covered it at least once, either on a stage or on an album or maybe even both. But it's the journey, that journey, the journey of the song is what I want to talk about. Its journey reminds me of my lesson plans and my EdTech integrations and my classroom procedures and my presentations and even my book. I started thinking about this after hearing Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History podcast, which, by the way, I'm obsessed with that podcast. I love it. But there was an episode in season 1 or 2, I'm not sure which, titled Hallelujah. Prior to that, I was familiar with the fact that the song was written by Leonard Cohen, whose wry delivery I always enjoyed, and later covered by Jeff Buckley, whose serene voice was taken from this world too quickly, after just one album, actually. And that's how I knew the song. I knew it was written by Cohen, performed by Cohen, and then later by Buckley, and I knew, I could picture and hear both versions. What I hadn't realized is just how tortured the evolution of that song was, and how much it relates to my work. So forgive me for borrowing heavily from Gladwell's podcast, which actually borrows heavily from Alan Light's book, The Holy or the Broken, Leonard Cohen, Jeff Buckley, and the Unlikely Ascent of Hallelujah. But that's all the more appropriate here, and you'll see why soon, that Gladwell is cited heavily Alan Light, and I'm now citing heavily both of them as I talk about this. But Leonard Cohen first wrote that song, or actually first recorded that song in 1984, 5 years after he'd started writing it. It's estimated that he wrote somewhere between 50 and 80 verses for it. Not lines, not words, not versions, verses. 50 to 80 verses. He recorded 4 of them in that 1984 session for his album Various Positions. And actually, I think they recorded in 83 and the album came out in 84. But anyhow, long time ago. You should go listen to that version. Not because it's good, but because it's barely listenable. I mean, it's pretty bad, at least to my ears. And I listened to it again today just to make sure. Yeah, not enjoyable. Look up Leonard Cohen. The album is Various Positions, and listen to that version of Hallelujah. And that badness of that original version reminds me of some of my lessons last year. It was my first time teaching many of the concepts that I was saddled with, and my first time using many of the contemporary technologies in a classroom of my own. I had been an ed tech coach for 5 years before that, so I was an expert in how to support educators in using those technologies, but I had never used them full time like that myself. And though my ideas and my strategies and my activities had potential, much like Leonard Cohen's song, they were not platinum record worthy. Speaking of platinum records, Cohen's, that album Various Positions, was so far from worthy of that status that his record label wouldn't even release it. He was a well-known artist at the time, but they turned the album away. It was actually released nearly 2 years after his recording by a different tiny record label. And the record did not do well at the time. It certainly didn't go platinum. But at least one person heard it and liked it, a guy named Robert Allen Zimmerman. We know him better, of course, as Bob Dylan. Dylan liked it and began playing it in his own shows. And this reminds me of something we talk about regularly here on Educational Duct Tape, the adjacent possible. Our ideas are expanded by those around us, and we've got to give them a chance to be exposed to other people to hear them, right? But like my lessons last year, the song, even when Dylan covered it, still wasn't winning any awards or recognition. Neither were my lessons. A few years later, a guy named John Cale, famous as a member of the Velvet Underground, heard Leonard Cohen play the song. And he asked Cohen if he could have the lyrics so that he could record it. So Cohen sent it to him, all 15 pages worth of lyrics. Remember, legend says that there may have been up to 80 verses of the song, though Cohen only recorded 4. Cohen, at this time, had started playing different verses when he performed it live. He had made some changes. He had reflected on it and decided there were better ways to play it. So he was no longer using those same 4. He was using, I think, 2 of those and 2 other verses or something like that. So he had changed it up. But when he sent it to John Cale, he sent them all 15 pages worth of verses. So Cale selected the verses that he wanted to record. They were a different set from what Cohen had selected. Some were the same and some were different, and they were from Cohen's scrapped collection of verses. And Cale recorded a stripped-down version of Hallelujah for a tribute album titled I'm Your Fan. Now, this reminds me of when I taught some of last year's lessons in later class periods. I kept the stuff that worked in my first class, and I added things that I had not previously used, right? We keep the good, and we bring in some other things, and we try that out. Now, that tribute album with Kale's version on it, does it go platinum? No. Just like that second iteration of my lesson, it did get better, but it's not quite there yet. Not many people bought that album, but a woman in New York City, she bought the CD, and her house sitter, a young musician named Jeff Buckley, he found it one day. Wow, right? He starts then performing a cover of it in his own little shows in New York City, and one night, a record exec sees him perform it and signs him to a contract. So in 1994, Buckley finally released his debut album, his only album, Grace, and the song is on there, and it's still not a platinum hit. That album does better than the Cohen one or the Kale version on the tribute album, and the song is better than either of those. But just like the third or fourth iteration of my lessons from last year, it's still not quite right yet. And a few years later, sadly, Buckley passed away in a tragic accident, and then the song's ascent truly begins. It starts appearing in soundtracks, in concerts, in TV shows, in singing competitions. It even appears in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. But the original, seriously, go listen to it. Like, pause right now and go look it up. Leonard Cohen, Hallelujah, on the album Various Positions. It's not worth listening to more than once. If you disagree, let me know. I apologize, but check it out. It had to evolve. It had to be put out there. It had to be reflected upon, to be tweaked, to be tried out by different musicians. It needed time. And I don't know about you, but my lessons need lots of time. So do my presentations at conferences and workshops. I'd be embarrassed to watch a video of one of my earliest presentations, just like listening to the original Hallelujah. But verses get dropped, cheesy choirs get removed. Oh, that choir on the original black. Anyhow, voices change. It becomes an acoustic guitar song instead of a piano song. And we end up with one of the most recognizable tunes of all time. Now, my presentations and my lessons, they're not that good, but they improve each time I do them. I find the clunky parts. I identify new things that could enhance it. I select the right tech. I eliminate tech that isn't adding to the lesson, and it gets better and better. My students might not care. As the song says, you don't really care for music, do you? But I care for the music of a good lesson or activity or presentation. I bet you do as well. Just like Cohen and Dylan and Cale and Buckley and King David, the subject of the song, care for the music of a good song. But like the baffled king composing Hallelujah, we have to stumble a little through our lessons, our edtech integrations, our presentations. Many of the concepts in my book grew through past podcast episodes, past presentations, and drafts of the book, just like the song. We have to let our ideas grow. We have to let ourselves try out our songs, quote unquote, that aren't ready for platinum records, again, quote, because that's how they grow. And we have to give ourselves permission to teach a lesson that is as good as we could do it for now, because that experience informs the next steps it'll take. We are, as teachers, most of us, as Malcolm Gladwell says in that podcast episodes, experimental innovators. We need to experiment with pedagogies and technologies and strategies and activities in order to flesh them out. Some things come to some of us quickly and are great from the beginning, like what Gladwell calls a conceptual innovator. But even then, we need to reflect and be open to modifications. We may even need to let our colleagues observe our lessons to give their feedback. After all, where would Hallelujah be if Dylan and Cale hadn't heard it? I've just got a few more words for you on this topic, 2 of them. The first is flossom, permission to not be perfect and to embrace your flaws. And iteration, trying lessons and strategies more than once and improving them as you go. Flossom and iteration. Flossom iteration. I mean, it worked for Hallelujah. Now I've done my best. I know it wasn't much, but now it's time for today's guest.
Today's guest.
All right, everybody. I am here with the first ever 3-time guest on the Educational Duct Tape podcast. She deserves some kind of special trophy or a plaque on her wall behind her. This is Mrs. Jen Giffen. Welcome in, Jen. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Jake. I'm so happy to be here. In fairness, though, the first appearance and second appearance was only supposed to be the first appearance, and I talk too much. So you're like, maybe we should turn this into a double. But Jake, I have noticed that since that first episode, like you used to have shorter episodes, and now they go longer because I think I encouraged everyone just to say absolutely every word that's on their mind. Everything.
You did. You broke the mold, Jen.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you are with an asterisk a 3-time guest right now because you're right. Your first time. And you and Manny Curiel also did the same thing where we just talked for so long. I was like, you know what? This is going to be 2 episodes.
Yeah, that's okay though. If you're having fun.
Right. Mostly it was an editing thing. I didn't mind releasing a 1 hour and 15-minute long episode for everybody. It was just like, I can't keep editing this. I need to cut this in half in between questions too.
Oh, that's awesome.
So Jen, for those people who don't know her is, and you could add addendums to this after I say it. Jen is a teacher librarian. Is that still accurate? Okay.
Right now I'm a shelved teacher librarian. Just I was redeployed for the year, but I'm coming
shelved pun.
I'm going back into circulation. Maybe I am in circulation. I don't know. What's the analogy there? You're good with analogies, Jake. Am I in circulation?
You're currently in the card catalog right now.
I am. But no, I'm back at it. Fingers crossed that everything goes as planned in the fall. But it's been a fun year. I taught 11th and 12th grade English and leadership. And so it was fun to do stuff with them. But yes, I am a teacher librarian in my heart. Yes.
In your heart. Yes. And just this past year during COVID, you've been a little more teacher, a little less librarian because of district decisions, because of the kind of instruction that needed to take place. But we know Jen better. That's how Jen's peers in Canada know her, or Canandia, as I said during the podcast episode years ago. But we know Jen better as one half of the team behind the Shukes and Giff podcast. We know her as a Google certified innovator. We know her as the educator or the teacher behind the Today I Sketchnoted courses. And now we know her as a SketchUp learning trainer too, right?
Yeah, that's an exciting new thing that I joined Casey Bell and the Shake Up Learning team. Just it's contract. It's for fun. Casey put it out there and said, hey, I'm looking for people. And she had the caveat that, I'm really looking for people who are based in the US, which I understood. And I was like, but you know what? I got some East Coast and Toronto's not too far. Like I'm an hour and a half from the border. So I threw it out there just to see why not take a risk, right? If we encourage risk taking all the time in what we do, Jake. So
we did.
I took a risk and Casey got in touch and she's like, I'm so excited for this. Let's go. And it was funny when we were chatting, it was, from the beginning, I was like, I walked upstairs to my husband. I'm like, I think I got it. And he's like, why? I'm like, well, it was like she basically started a summer learning project with me. She's like, well, that's good news. So yeah, it was really great. So yeah.
It goes well when during the interview, you start planning what you're going to do once you've got the job. So you must already have it, right?
Yeah. And Casey's so wonderful. She's such a wonderfully positive person to be around. So I'm really excited to learn alongside her.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a great matchup. Like she would have been crazy not to take you on because combining what she does for educators with what you do for educators, I think really, I mean, it's going to be great. And I love it. You'll meet in the middle, right between Toronto and Texas, and you'll cover all of the United States that way, right?
Where's that? What would be halfway? Kansas?
Ish. Yeah. They're like Matt Miller's on a map waving. It's like, it's me, it's Indiana, right?
I'll put Matt on the way. It'd be amazing. And the funny thing with Casey Bell is my maiden name is actually Bell.
Oh, and I remember that. I remember you saying
we've had a bunch of run-ins just about people in our family with similar names. And I said, we've got to be related somewhere. So she's the y'all and I'm the A, and off we go.
The y'all and the A. I want to see that like co-presenter one time, y'all and A.
I
would. I like it.
The whole team is that she's brought on is fabulous. And I can't wait for the next time we do something live where we could maybe all present together and see people. I keep saying, I'm like, I can't wait to see people and touch them again appropriately. Like, right? Like I say it, and then as it comes out, I'm like, oh, that sounds so good. I'm excited. We're pretty still locked down here in Ontario, but we'll see.
Me too. Yeah, I was able to do one in-person event, and it just felt so good. I was nervous that it was going to feel weird, and that I was going to. I don't know. Like I was like, what's it going to be like? Like, am I getting
Yeah.
like, is it going to feel awkward? And it didn't. It felt amazing. Like
Good.
once I started, I was like, this feels so good. I was so excited, like to see smiling faces in an audience instead of maybe a few smiling faces on a Zoom screen. Like it just felt so good.
Oh, I'm so yeah. I saw we're in a common Twitter DM together, and I saw you posted that, and I was so excited for you, but honestly, a little bit jealous.
Yeah.
I am like every time you see that, right? You're like, oh, soon it'll be me, right? Soon it'll be me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it was.
But yeah.
So we're burying the lead here. The reason I wanted to talk to you today, Jen, and make you the third time ever educational duct tape guest was because you made some awesome sketch notes for me as part of the rollout of my book, Educational Duct Tape. And I, as soon as this book was nearing the finishing stages, and I realized I had to start doing some stuff to promote the book, which is hard for me to do because I don't want to like go out there and like brag about stuff. But I just wanted to put it out there and support educators. But I started to think about like what would I like to see for my book? And one of the first things I thought of was I love Jen's sketch notes, and I love that. There's a lot of people out there that make great sketch notes. Obviously, there's your friend Sylvia Duckworth, and there's Carrie Bauckham, and there's other people who I love the sketch notes that I see from them. But everybody's has their own character in it, right? Like you could feel like I could look at a sketch note, no name on it, and know who it is. If it's one of you 4 or 5 or 6 people, and I know right away whose it is. And the way that you make them just it just spoke to me. If I kind of matched the tone of the book to me in a way, I don't know why that is. I think
they're a bit playful. Like mine are a little bit playful. There's nothing really like I don't do true to people. Like it's definitely not art. They're like they're doodles and they're supposed to be fun. And
I don't know about not art, but I know what you're saying by that, how they're playful and they have that doodle feature. I do think they are art because you're creating something that's coming out of your own head using your own hard work and creative willpower. I think that makes it art right there. Okay. But still, so my question for you, I've got educational duct tape, right? I've got to ask you an educational duct tape question here. How do you sketchnote? What do you use? I'd love to hear I think people would love to hear about the tech that you use for it and maybe some of the processes behind it.
Yeah. So I'll start with when I started sketchnoting was almost 5 years ago. So in 2016, I just decided to get into it. I was reading a book called A More Beautiful Question. And the fact that even I can remember that, I think speaks to the power of sketchnoting. And it's like, wow, there's really great stuff in this and I want to remember. And how am I going to remember? And I saw a ton about sketchnoting, and I was not an artist. I was never a doodler, Jake. Like I was not one to sit and like doodle in the margins of my papers. Like that's not who I was, but I thought, I think this could be good for me. I was big on color. I was big on shapes and things like that. And I was like, oh, I'll give it a try. And when I present on sketchnoting, I share my first sketchnote so that people realize like what I'm doing now is a 5 years in the making. It is not the first time. So if yours looks more like this, and I have to explain, I'm like, see this here, what do you think it is? And people are like putting guesses. I'm like, no, it's a foot, which shouldn't be that hard to draw, but no one really gets it. Right. But anyway, I started analog for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was I wanted to be really present. And I found if I was doing something on an iPad and get the pop-ups and you'd veer off, and go down that rabbit hole. So what I started with was actually, I have it right here. I'll show you because we're actually videoing. I have this. See that? Nice. This is my roll of markers and pencil crayons, and most of it's still here. My kids sometimes grab this, kids.
Yeah, my daughter would definitely be jealous of that, and my son, one of the 2 sons. The other one would be like, "Could you play baseball?" But 2 of my kids would be jealous of that.
Good, that son could go play with my kids. Okay. No, actually, that's not true. I've one. We have same. I have 2 of my kids would be drawing, and one of them playing sports.
Right.
Although he's getting into art lately, but anyway, I digress. So I started with this. It was just pen and paper, and literally a little journal that I found that had blank pages. And I started one day with, that book. And then it turned into, I'm going to do this at staff meetings because it was a culture that was really inclusive of that kind of activity. We had a principal and a senior consultant it's when I was working at district. They were like, yeah, we sketchnote. This is what we do. It's fine. So no one was like, what are you doing? And like, why aren't you paying attention? Like it was an embraced sort of mindset, because there is some people who push back on it, right. And I'm happy to debate with them the benefits of sketchnoting. And then people kept saying to me, especially Sylvia, kept saying like, oh, Jen, you need to try analog, or you need to try digital. You need to try digital. I was like, oh, I don't want to try digital. And I really like that I'm not going digital. And then I had the opportunity to get an iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil through work. And I was like, okay, well, I'll try it. And then I started realizing like things that I could do. So for example, the sketches that I made for the book, which is great, by the way, they were so fun to make, was like the Jake, right? As I called him, the Jake.
And
I
I
was
love
able,
that in our emails back and forth, you'd be
we
like, here's
called
the
him.
Jake I'm working on.
It was well, and I could just copy the Jake in and be like, okay, here's the Jake.
Right.
And I didn't have to redraw him. So for that consistency, it was good. And sometimes like I just doodle, right? I can't ever just sit and do one thing. Like my husband drives him crazy when we're watching, TV or movies or whatever. I'm either falling asleep or doodling. And he'll be like looking, he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm just doodling. And then I'll draw like a really cool microphone. He's like, oh. And with digital, it's great because I can go back and I can copy it into another one and just reuse that again and again and again, right? So I loved that aspect of it. The perfectionist came out in me a little bit more, which I don't like because with analog, you just had to embrace it. Like there was once I drew a bear and he ended up with like webbed frog feet. And I just like, okay, how am I going to do this? And I put a log in front of him and I was like, okay, he's attacking me from behind a log and that's okay. But when I started, most sketchnoters use Procreate.
Okay.
Procreate is a paid app. I want to say it's 10 American. I think it's about 15, 12, 13, 15 Canadian. I haven't checked in a while. I bought it a while ago. And I like it, but it's really robust. And I find for me, it's way too overwhelming. So I actually use Tayasui Sketches. So it's a Tayasui. It's a Japanese company and it provides everything that you can get in Procreate, but a little bit stripped down. And what I love is there's a free version. And I'm all about that favorite 4-letter F word in education, right? If I can get it for free, that's great because not everyone can get paid apps on the iPads they might have in their classroom. And Tayasui actually partnered with Apple and they have Tayasui School now. So it's not their free version. It's like a free plus. It's like halfway to pro. So you don't have to pay and it has a lot of the same features. Not all of them though. You can pay for the pro, which is the same price as Procreate. And what I like about it, and I'm hoping that we can maybe see it here. Let me just open a new thing.
I remember when Sylvia was on the show too, we talked sketchnoting and those were the three main ones she mentioned.
What I love, see like the tools are right there on the side. And I'm really visual. So I'm like, okay, I need something that's going to look like a pencil, or I need something that's going to look like spray paint. And I remember those, whereas the brush names, I don't. And you can create favorites and do all that. I don't know. I really like this one. I've tried to go over to Procreate a couple of times, but I keep coming back to Tayasui. So I do that. I have an Apple Pencil. My Apple Pencil has been acting up lately, and the Easter Bunny brought two of my kids these knockoff Apple Pencils from Amazon.
Okay.
That I believe in talking to
How do you know where the Easter Bunny shops?
Well, the Easter Bunny and I exchanged texts, and the Easter Bunny told me I've gotten in with the Easter Bunny, and the Easter Bunny told me they were like I think I paid 30 Canadian, so you're looking sort of like mid $20 range, and they look just like an Apple Pencil.
They do,
and they work just like an Apple Pencil.
What?
I find that they hold their charge longer. Honestly, I don't know that I'd ever buy an Apple Pencil again.
Oh, no.
These are just that good.
You heard it here first, everybody.
No. So if you're an artist, like I'm sure there's people out there who do digital art for a living, think I'm crazy right now for saying that. But for my purpose and what I want to do, and I think what most of us want to do in education, I think these little knockoff ones are awesome. And I'll get the link.
Yeah.
And you can
from
put
Easter
it
Bunny, of course.
From the the Easter Bunny's already sent me the link, so
okay, good. You saved it in a Wakelet collection.
I did. I have I should add it to my Wakelet collection. Actually, that's a really good idea.
Maybe you and the Easter Bunny have a collaborative Wakelet collection.
All right, poor Easter Bunny. But anyway, yeah. So that's what I do. That's the very long answer to what do I use. I use Tayasui and some sort of Apple Pencil or Apple Pencil knockoff, depending if mine is charged.
One thing I love about that story is that that's what we talk about on Educational Duct Tape, right? Is that you kind of were aware of two different tools, right? You were aware of Procreate, you were aware of Tayasui and the different versions of Tayasui, but then you assessed which one was best for your needs. You knew that either of them could work. You understand why somebody like Sylvia Duckworth might prefer Procreate, or whoever it is might prefer Procreate, but you also understand why you prefer that one. And you know that, both of those two tools work just fine. And I, when I'm doing a presentation on Educational Duct Tape, I often say, after I discuss what the mindset is, I'll say this, so now I have a podcast about it. And one thing I love about the podcast is that the guest and I always share different tools, and sometimes we share multiple different tools because there's not just one right tool. And it's funny because when you're speaking, whether it's on the podcast or in a speech, you have things going through your kind of internal dialogue that you're not saying to the audience, right?
Oh my
And
gosh,
I'll picture certain episodes, and I could picture, because when you were on, we must have talked about like 12 different audio tools.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of that idea, because we wanted to share them all, because we're like, these are all valid options, right? Just like Procreate and Tayasui are both valid options. And just like the original Apple Pencil and the knockoff one are both valid options, and an iPad Pro and a Chromebook are both valid options for doing this. You pick the one that fits best for your situation. And somebody might be able to say like this, the best is an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil with Procreate. And you might be like, well, yeah, maybe that is the best, but that's not the best for me. Like it's what's best for me.
And not everyone has a tablet. Like I actually, in my leadership course, we're just finishing up because we're still in school. And one of my students reached out and said, Miss, my paper that I'm using is too small. I'm not going to, they were doing sketchnotes on a Wakelet that I created about implicit bias. And there was some, anyway, we know Wakelet. And so there's some videos and there's some articles and there's some like anecdotes by me in there, and they had to synthesize their learning in a sketchnote. And I taught them how to sketchnote. I'm like, you have no idea. Like this is the big time right here. Like I present this a lot. And the kids are like, whatever, Mrs. Giffen. And I was like trying to toot my own horn, and they really kick their ass.
Right, whatever.
And it's very humbling to teach high school students.
Right. Middle schoolers are the same way.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, and one of my students reached out and said, is there a digital tool I can use? I'm like, I'm pretty sure this girl does not have a tablet. So I said, go to AutoDraw by Google.
Yeah.
And I had students last semester try it first. And I talked about it, but I actually had a student do it and create this beautiful sketch note with AutoDraw. And I'm like, there's an answer too. Yep. And that's something totally accessible by a Chromebook. Like you can do a lot. So like you said, the problem is often when we share that many tools is people become overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. They can't see the trees for the forest or the forest for the trees, whichever way you're doing it. And yeah, so I don't know. That's where I would go. I would say Tayasui, and I would say for me, and like I said, some sort of stylus that works. Yeah. Is what I like. Nice.
Awesome. Well, I know some people are going to be like, nice, I'm starting now. Right. And they're going to grab those things and do that. That's awesome. So once I said, okay, I love Jen's sketch notes, I would love some sketch notes relating to my book. So I reached out to you, and you were kind enough to read through the chapters of the book. And then turn them into sketch notes for me, which was just such a fun process for me to see them. I was every time I'd see an email come through from you, I'd be like, and I go like look and see what it was. I was so excited to see them. So one, I'm gonna ask. This is a hard question for me to ask, because it feels I don't know. It feels I don't know what the right word.
I'm picking your favorite child or something. That's what I feel
yes,
like.
Yes.
Dad, meet my kids. Which one do you like the best?
Right. So these are my kids. I'm super proud of them. Which one's your favorite? So I would like to know, not my kids, but the story. So the book is full of stories and anecdotes. Was there one that because I think you and I we're both storytelling people for sure. Like we've already both told multiple stories during this 17-minute discussion. So what was a favorite story for you as you were reading through it?
Oh gosh, I don't know. The one I could relate to the most was the one about choosing where you should go for dinner with your spouse, right? Your spouse says, where should we go for dinner? And you're like, there's too many choices. And that's me. My husband and I, he knows when we get to a restaurant and they're like, do you need a menu? He's like, she doesn't, because he knows I've reconned the whole menu ahead of time, because making choices for me in the moment is far too stressful. So I related to that one a lot. Yeah. I laughed a lot at you talking about rolling over the blow up bouncy castle and the sound, because I'm like, yeah, if 3 boys like farting, it would that would have been hilarious for them. My heart loved the story about your daughter getting all upset about the crying grapes. I thought that was so
right.
So sad. And drawing the crying grapes is probably one of my favorite things to draw. But my favorite story was probably the kid who watched the video, and you had changed. You didn't the beardless Jake, which you even said startled you in it. He was fun to draw too. So there's a story where Jake had looked one way in a video, and then the students were watching it, and he's like, "Did you watch this?" Because he had to watch the video for the X-Acto knife, and he's like, "Did you watch this?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, how did you look?" And all the kids in the background are like, beard glasses," which he didn't have at the time. And the kid's like, "You looked handsome." That's totally what a kid would say. I actually burst out laughing. I was like, "Yep." That's working with kids in a nutshell. So that's chapter 12. Probably chapter 12 was the one that I probably had. It took me probably the longest to draw of all of them. I think I'd have to go back and look.
Well, you had to change the Jake.
I had to change the Jake, which wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, thankfully. But yeah, I did have to change the Jake. But isn't the Jake, is he in there twice? I'm going to pull it up and look at it.
There's a bearded Jake in the computer, which
That's
I love that. And then there's the beardless Jake off the screen. And it's funny because they would come through, and my daughter especially, Parker, it has gotten into sketchnoting. I came home one day from school and she held up this paper like, Daddy, look what I made. Cause she was already off school because she got off about a week or so before me. And she had made like all these like banners and titles and things like that. Because she watched the video on YouTube about different like infographic kind of titles and stuff like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, Parker, I have the book for you. And I ran downstairs and I grabbed her Sylvia's book and I was like, look through this. And she's kind of been geeking out about sketchnoting. So I would show them to her as I got them. And when she saw the beard glasses and handsome teachers one, the one with that story with the kid who wasn't watching my video, she's like, she forgot your beard. Like as soon as she looked at it, and I was like, no, that's part of the story.
They're all like, there's this consistency throughout. And then it's like, it was very funny.
And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, no beard there. But I love you have the kid in the corner who said you looked handsome. And that's the perfect look. Shoulders are shrugging and that perfect like meme style shrug and with question marks around his head. But he's got a smile on his face.
And this was the challenge. This is not one of your questions. One of the challenges for me, like of everything that I created through this, the Jake took me the longest. So I sat for probably a little over an hour that first day. I should show you all the iterations. Do I still have it? My first Jakes were terrible. Oh shoot, where is he? And then I just sort of landed and I'm a copier. I go in and I look at other things online and I'm like, oh, could I do that? When I sketchnote, I keep the noun project open all the time. And I'm like, what's there that I could draw because they're easy. And I talk when I do sketchnoting sessions about knowing the visual alphabet. And if you can draw those shapes, the 12 shapes or characters in the visual alphabet, then you can draw anything. And speaking as a non sort of like an artist, a new to art. I don't even know what to call myself really. You can draw anything, but people I find so hard. So like these were some of the first Jake iterations.
Look at all those Jakes.
I was like, this isn't Jake. This is not Jake. And then all of a sudden you can see him. He's up there. He's up here in the corner.
There's Jake.
And I was like, oh, that's kind of Jake. So I copied him and I went to another, and I was like, okay, maybe I can go and I'll draw Jake a little bit differently. So then I drew a bunch of Jakes with different faces.
Oh my gosh, Jen, look at all those Jakes.
They're all the Jakes. No, I would draw them and I copy and I paste. And then I showed my husband the picture. I'm like, okay, so does this kind of look cartoony? He's like, yeah, I think it looks great. But then Jake came back. Jake is picky, people. He came back and he didn't like that I had him in a tunic because I didn't know how to draw one.
I was wearing a tunic.
You were 100%. And when you came back, you're like, can I be wearing something different? I'm like, oh my God, this is so stressful. Why did I agree to do this? And so then he's like, I normally wear plaid shirts. I'm like, I know, Jake, I've met you. I know what you wear. And I was like, it was so funny. I wasn't really freaking out that much, but I was like, how am I going to do this? What a challenge. So I completely broke my sketchnoting rules for this.
You brought an image.
Shirt, yeah, I did. Your plaid shirt is not a drawing. It is an image that I literally found a square of plaid in colors that I thought, okay, yeah, this could go. And then Jake's like, can you draw him with his sleeves runched up? I'm like, Jake, come on. Like, no,
listen, you're going to look like you're wearing a sleeveless plaid shirt with stick arms. I'm like, all right, Jen.
Oh my gosh. And I tried the arms thing. I was killing myself laughing. I was like, I cannot even send these to him. I'm so embarrassed. That's like, he's going to be like, who did I partner with to do these? This is ridiculous. This woman can't draw. What have I done?
No, I love them.
So anyway, yeah. So I did, for the first time ever, other than when I normally, when I've done other books, I'll import the image of the cover so I do it justice because I want people to see what it actually looks like. Mm-hmm. I imported like a little swatch of plaid and then I drew the buttons over top and this and that. I was like, okay, yeah, that looks all right. Right. And I had different color plaids. And I think I sent you one that you're like, oh, I like it a little bit lighter. And I was like, yeah, you're right. This one doesn't look very good. But yeah, it was the zhuzhing of the arms that I was like, yeah, I really don't think. And I tried. I was like, oh my gosh, because it was the importing of the image wouldn't let me do it. And I actually found a tutorial I watched, just like Parker, a tutorial on how to draw plaid. I was like, oh, just do this. And I did it. And I was like, oh, that doesn't look right. And I tried it about 4 or 5 times. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to import the image. Plaid. And I did. And you know what? That's what I love about sketchnoting. There's no rules. You can do what you want. You make it. And when I do sketches like this, like they constantly evolve.
Mhm.
And that was something that I now realize. I'm like, well, you know what? That's okay for a little part of it. If that's what I need to do, then that's what I'm going to do. So thank you for that.
But then, like you said, it
So,
became 12 or 13 sketches because you like once you had to iterate that, like getting the Jake right and getting the plaid right and getting the tunic right. I've got to add in the image.
There was the one time that you had pants and you're like, Jen, that's way too many. There's way too much jeans. And I almost wrote back something about the Canadian tuxedo, right? With the like denim on denim on denim. But I didn't. And so
I felt like I looked like Al Borland in that one. Do you know who Al Borland is? From Home Improvement.
Oh, it was so funny. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. All right, Jen. Well, before I let you get on to the rest of your day, I'm sure a lot of people are listening and they're wondering how can I make these sketch notes? So you gave them some tools, right? You talked about different apps they could use and different tools they could use for it. But I also mentioned Sylvia's book, which is a fantastic book if they prefer book-based learning for it. And I'll add in a link to that in the show notes too. But how can they learn from you? Like, what if they really like your style, which I love your style, and they're like, I want to learn how Jen does this. And if they hear you talking about this visual alphabet or whatever you called it, and these different ways that you think through this stuff, how can they learn from you how to do this sketchnoting stuff?
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's a fun thing to talk about. It's something that I constantly do. I've been invited to a district here. They're doing a virtual summer camp for kids, and I'm doing a 90-minute with middle schoolers.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
Yeah. And my presentation is pretty much the same wherever I do it. I just there's certain stories I put in for adults versus like stories for littles and every time I do it, I'm like, oh, I took that away. I'm going to change that. So I say it's the same, but if you actually go back to like 10 or 12 times ago,
right?
Like, oh, wow, this is totally different because each time it's like teaching a lesson again and again,
for sure.
right? You tweak it. And so, yeah, and I love it. So I hope that someone comes in and listeners come in and have a look and see what the hullabaloo's all about, because it really did. It changed me in so many ways, not the least of which it provided me this rich PLN. Like when I started, my first big thing was, Matt Miller's Ditch Book Summit or Ditch Summit. The first one they did in 2016. And I was like, I'm going to put these out there, be vulnerable and put them out in social media. And I got some traction. All of a sudden my PLN grew like sixfold in 2 weeks. And I was like, what is going on? All of a sudden, then I saw the power of Twitter, and then that allowed me to get to some conferences and like do more presenting and then make more connections and then do more learning and connect with other people. And it was just for me, and it may not be sketchnoting for other people, but for me, that was the thing that I was like, wow, this is really going to be something that I really enjoy doing. It can evolve over time with me. And it's just, I don't know. I like it too, because the presentation that I do, and I tell people this, like, take this slide deck, go back into your learning environment and present it. Like it is not a secret. You don't need to call me, and you're more than welcome. Just give me credit and go ahead and do it with your students. Do it. Cause I get that a lot. That's actually sketchnoting like 301 is okay. Now how to do it with students, which I've been percolating for about 6 months. Cause I normally run a course. Today I sketchnoted and I put that on hold. I was going to run one last fall, and then I was redeployed into the classroom. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll do it in second semester, because I was supposed to only have one class, and then I switched to 3 classes, and which is like a full timetable in secondary here. So I was like, you know what, I don't want to take away from my students and have this passion project, because I really dive into it when I do it. So I was like, I want to give it the time that it deserves, because I'm very active. And if you ever taken any of Tony Vincent's courses, and then he's in there and he's like, I try to run it the same way, because I really appreciate that out of Tony. So,
well, so you do hope to roll one of those out in the future, though?
I hope maybe in the fall again, but I don't want to make any promises. But if you go to sketchnoted.com, there is a Google form there that you can fill out, just saying, hey, when you release it, just let me know. And then I send out emails and I say, hey, you want to join? And then once people join I always go to past. I've had 2 cohorts so far, and I email everyone who was in those cohorts. I say, I'm running it again. Because sometimes things happen, right? They're like, oh, I really want to do it, but then I get redeployed into the classroom because COVID. So they didn't get through the whole thing. So I always invite people to come back with other cohorts if they want to redo the course or do it for the first time, because they need that push in that community. You know, sometimes, you can go to the gym, but it's better if you have a trainer, because then someone's you're being counted on to be there.
Yeah. Or not even a trainer, a workout partner, a sketchnote partner.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. And it does make a difference. So, and it's a good community. It's and what I love is it really, when I run it, it fills my social media with a lot of like beautiful visuals and not a lot of drama and art. And yeah, it's really, it's very fulfilling.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I will link into the show notes today. I sketchnoted so people can go sign up for that mailing list for it.
Yeah.
I'll also include links to Jen's amazing podcast, one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, Shukes and Giff, and to Jen on Twitter at Virtual Giff. So you can learn from Jen about sketchnoting and some other things. And I'm also going to link in all of those amazing, not show notes. I'm going to link in show notes. I'm going to link show notes into my show notes. No.
Show notes into the show notes. It's very meta.
I'm going to link in those sketch notes, not show notes, those sketch notes from Educational Duct Tape, which I am obsessed with. I have them. They're now the wallpaper of our bedroom. My wife thinks it's a little bit weird, but
that is a little bit weird, Jake. That's weird.
I am in love with them. I think everybody else is going to love them almost as much as me. They're a little more special to me, but I think you guys are going to love them too because Jen did a magnificent job on them.
Thank you, Jake. They're a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you for making them, and thank you for joining us today, Jen.
Oh, thanks for having me. I look forward to my 4th visit.
Right. Someday it'd be book number when book number 2 comes out. You'll do that set of sketch notes. No, I'm not writing another book, Jen. This was too much work. No way.
Wait, maybe we'll do something we could present together. You could get up and you could do your presentation, and I'll live sketch note it on the side.
Gosh.
That would be so stressful. Stressful. I don't
think that would be stressful, but you think that'd be stressful because you have to make the drawings. I just have to talk, which I'm good at.
If you told me ahead of time what you were going to say and I could visualize it, then I think it'd be okay.
You just suggested it, though. Now it's going to happen.
I know. What am I thinking?
All right. Well, let's get off this call before Jen agrees to anything else. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Okay. Thanks, Jake. Bye, everyone.
How fun was that chat with Jen? I don't know if you could tell, but we recorded that months ago in the beginning of the summer, and I was hoping to get it out in the summer, and I was just so busy. But I didn't want you guys to miss out on it because it was so good. She's so much fun to talk to and has so many great ideas, and I am so proud to show everybody those sketch notes, and it's because she's just so good at it, and they look so great, and she has such a good style with them, but also good knowledge about how we could do it, right? How the rest of us could do it, how our students could do it, and things like that. And she just super, super talented. So let's review a little bit about what Jen shared here before we move on. So she shared about a book that she was reading that kind of started her on her sketchnoting journey, which is titled A More Beautiful Question. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Not directly related to sketchnoting, but it was something that kind of inspired her to want to take notes in a fun way, and sketchnoting as being the way she did it. She uses an iPad and an Apple Pencil, although she did reference a generic Apple Pencil, which I'll put a link to in the show notes as well for you. But she also talked about how she did them analog as well, did them on pencil and paper and took pictures of them. Nothing wrong with that. There's still benefits in it, right? She talked about using Procreate, the popular iPad app. She said it's a very robust one, but it could be overwhelming. So it's a good one to use, but also it might be too much for you. She prefers Tayasui Sketches, and there's a couple different versions of it out there. One of them obviously is Tayasui Sketches EDU or schools or something. I forget what it's called, but I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And then she also mentioned using the auto draw tool from Google to be able to kind of generate little icons and things like that. So I'll put links to all those things in the show notes. I'll also link in the actual show notes she made for the book, as well as a link to Sylvia Duckworth's How to Sketchnote, a step-by-step manual for teachers and students. All right, last but certainly not least, time for my favorite part of the show, which is the celebration of the adjacent possible. As I mentioned earlier, adjacent possible is the idea that whatever you do, whatever you try, whoever you talk to, whoever you listen to, wherever you go, it opens you up to new adjacent possibilities. And the connections between me and you, between duct tapers, between educators, those open up our adjacent possibilities. It's really quite similar to what we talked about in the soapbox moment earlier, where Leonard Cohen repeated that song multiple times and worked on different versions. That was the adjacent possible. And then Bob Dylan heard it. That was more adjacent possible. And then John Cale heard it. That was more adjacent possible. And then, somewhere in there, Leonard Cohen made more changes to it. That was adjacent possible. And then Jeff Buckley heard it, and that was adjacent possible. And the song evolved throughout that time. That's the adjacent possible. And we're going to celebrate that by hearing from some of you guys. Today, we've got a message from the show's Flipgrid coming from Brian Santama. Brian Santama of the Osprey Reading Experience podcast that I was on quite recently, which is a great show. Take it away, Brian.
Hey, Jake. Brian Santama from Fort Myers, Florida. Mr. Santama on social. I believe wholeheartedly in ed taking responsibility and utilizing the tool belt that you have preached and others have spoken of as well. We don't want to spread ourselves out too much, both for the time it takes to learn a tool and the costs. Yet after taking a SAMR model survey from my school, I had to really sit there and think about my usage of technology in the classroom and looking at the results of it with the person who administered it and seeing and asking the question, what are we doing or what can we do to advance our teachers and our students past the augmentation level? It seems in order to do that, we have to expose them, our teachers and our students, to a wide variety of tech tools so that they can determine the best tool for the job and for the vision. And I'm new to SAMR, so hopefully this will all become clearer as I learn more. As a middle school teacher, I want to make sure that my students are prepared for the next level. So I want to get them off to a good start. But, middle schoolers aren't really known for their self-motivation. So how can we encourage them to explore ed tech on their own? Are people using hyperdocs with a categorized list of tools that they can click on? Badges, challenges? Joe, should I bring Jake Miller to the school? What can we do to get these kids motivated so we can start moving them along in the SAMR model? Thanks, Jake.
So, Brian, thank you for that message. First of all, my favorite part of it was that in your Flipgrid, your picture, I think you had your glasses on, and then in your video, you had your glasses off. And when I clicked play, it was like suddenly your glasses just disappeared. It was really fun when I did that. It really took me off guard. There will be a link to it in the show notes in case any of you guys need to see this. My second favorite part of this is how much passion you're putting into what you do for your students and the staff that you work with, and it's really awesome how motivated you are on this. So let's talk about your thoughts there. So first of all, the SAMR model, I go back and forth on the SAMR model myself. I used to kind of preach the SAMR model, and I used to present about it in presentations I did, and I thought it was a really great thing to talk about. And now I've kind of calmed down on that. I'm not anti-SAMR model. I just think the SAMR model is a really good kind of self-assessment tool, self-reflection tool. I don't think that it's necessarily like an A, B, C, D, F scale where you want to get to A, in that model. You don't necessarily have to get to R in the SAMR model to be good. I think what it is a really good way to look at the things you're doing in your classroom and deciding, could I be doing something better for my students, and is it worth it? Is the benefit worth the risk or the work that's put into it, right? Sometimes you could do a lesson that has really great analog features or in-person face-to-face discussion features, and just having substitution tech in it is good enough, and that's not a bad thing. Of course, when we can redefine it by using technology, that typically is a great thing, but it's not necessarily necessary. So that's one thing I like to keep in mind about it. It's a good way to reflect on what we're doing, but it doesn't necessarily mean we should always try to be moving up on the SAMR model. So, and I think your mindset was right on that based on what you were saying there too, Brian. But I just wanted to share that for everybody to hear. The other part of this is motivating students, and that can be tricky. And I used to be in a tech coach role, and I know the challenges of that. So I'm just going to kind of riff on a couple thoughts here. We know from the work of Dan Pink, which I reference a lot on the show, that human beings, whether they're kids or grown-ups, are motivated by three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So they are motivated when they get to choose what they're doing, right? They're motivated when they get to work towards mastery on it, and they're motivated when they have a greater purpose. And if you just tell your students, we're going to learn how to use, let's say, Adobe Spark, they're not having autonomy there, and they don't feel purpose there. But they might have, some feelings of mastery there because they get to work towards mastering something. So if we could level that up by bringing in autonomy and purpose, like if we can make it, they're developing things for a charity or something, then maybe that brings in some purpose. That's not necessarily the only way to do it, but if we could bring in something that brings in some purpose, that's going to ratchet up the motivation. And if we can give them some autonomy, like giving them a choice on what they do with it, that can ratchet up the motivation. We can also ratchet up the mastery part of that by adding in some kind of gamification to it. Like you mentioned badging. I think that's a great idea to ratchet up that mastery piece of motivation there. So I think those are the three things we kind of want to work on to increase the motivation. But still, if the students aren't choosing to learn the technologies, if they're being forced to learn the technologies, we're not going to see maximum motivation. So I think one thing that I like to do is start relatively simple with the tool, let them learn enough of the basics to see what it can do. Maybe do something kind of like a scavenger hunt or a tutorial that takes a relatively short amount of time and gets them just far enough to where they could use the tool independently, and then let them go wild with it and make their own thing. So I think there's a perfect mix of how much, instructional and tutorial based learning there can be before we get to them just getting to make things of their own. And again, still, you're going to have some kids that aren't necessarily into that tech tool, but that's going to help with some motivation there. Next, you mentioned the idea of like a hyperdoc, and I think you were kind of insinuating kind of like a choice board, right, where there was lists of tools and they choose one. In my experiences, especially with middle schoolers, if you give them a list of technologies to choose from, they are most likely going to choose one that they already know how to use because the risk is lower. Or they're going to choose one that they've already identified that they want to learn how to use because the reward is higher. They're going to ignore all of the ones that are new to them and have a risk and they're not intrigued about learning how to do. I think like 80% of your students are going to ignore those new choices. Now, I don't know that for sure. I'd love to see somebody kind of test that and see, but that's my hunch. So I would turn to what Casey Bell said when she was on the show a while back when we were talking about choice boards. And she basically said that she never gives any choices that are unfamiliar to the students when she does a choice board. So if she wanted to do a choice board that had 3 different ways that students could do a project, she would have already done projects during the course of the year where they used each of those tools and now they're choosing which one to use, right? So maybe earlier in the year, they did those short tutorials that I mentioned earlier, or scavenger hunts. So they had a little bit of experience with each tool and now they're choosing between them. So they're not brand new to them. The other option is to use, kind of the same way, use what John Carippo and Marlena Hebern talk about a lot with the, Edu Protocols books, which is to reduce the cognitive load. In other words, when you're introducing a new pedagogy or activity or tech tool, to keep the complexity of what they're doing in their brain lower, right? So maybe learn how to use Canva to make a biography of yourself, like a sports card about yourself. Like they're learning how to use the tool, but the information they're putting onto it is all familiar to them, right? It's all their own information. They're making their profile maybe for a fake social media site or something like that. So they're learning how to use the tech tool, but they're not using new content in it, so that then you can level it up to the point where maybe when you're requiring the content, they've already been introduced to the tool. So then it's kind of 2 options. One is to do some basic tutorials. Another, I guess a third option, is to require everybody use it for a certain content project. And another is to first use the tool for something that's just kind of for fun, maybe a getting to know you project where the only challenge about it is the technology, before you then give them a choice, because they're not going to choose it unless they're familiar with it. So Brian, I hope that helps. I think you've already got the first part of motivating the students to learn technology, and that's that you're motivated to get them to learn technology. And I think they will see and feel and hear that from you, and that will help. It won't go all the way because they're middle schoolers, but I do think that piece right there will help. Okay, so thank you for that, Brian, and that does it for today's celebration of the adjacent possible. Remember, if you've got a question or a comment or some feedback to share, you could tweet it to me at Jake Miller Tech. You could email it to me at jakemillertech@gmail.com. You could submit it on the show's Flipgrid, which is flipgrid.com/edu duct tape. or message me or record a message to me on the SpeakPipe page, which is speakpipe.com/edu duct tape. And those links, of course, are also in the show notes. I would love to feature you or your question or whatever, maybe your insights, maybe something you want to share in a future episode. Okay, that does it for today's celebration of the adjacent possible and the rest of the show for today. Before we wrap it up, I've got to give you your homework for leading up to the next podcast episode. Your homework for this time is to find an educator who likes fantasy football and tell them about this podcast, because I currently am celebrating what looks to be a runaway victory in week 3 of my fantasy football league. I'm currently 1-1. My first player playing this week is doing really well. So I think I'm going to be 2-1 after this weekend. So tell somebody who's an educator, who likes fantasy football about this podcast. Tell them Jake likes fantasy football too. You guys would be great friends and you should listen to his podcast. That would be really helpful. Well, that does it for today's episode. Check the show notes for details about signing up for my newsletter, joining the Duct Tapers Facebook group, inquiring about having me speak at an upcoming event, getting some podcast stickers, and more. And don't forget to do your homework. As always, as a parent, I'm grateful for the work you do. And as an educator, I'm proud of your dedication to lifelong learning. I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please visit eduducttape.com to join the discussion, share possible topics, inquire about being a guest, or contact Jake. And remember, duct is spelled with a T, not a quack quack K.